Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 86, The Awakening of the Quincy King. With a triumphant laugh, Shihoin Yoruchi tightened her grip around Uehara Shiroa, her lithe body coiling around him like a snake. I caught you. You can't escape this time, she declared smugly. Just as she applied more pressure, Uehara Shiroa smirked. With minimal effort, he shrugged off her hold, causing her to lose her balance and fall straight into his arms. Taking full advantage of the situation, he wrapped his arms around the dusky-skinned beauty, her bare body pressed against his. A teasing grin tugged at his lips. "Heh, I could eat this chocolate for the rest of my life," he mused, his golden eyes gleaming with mischief. "TSK. Failed again," Yoruchi huffed, her tone carrying both frustration and reluctant admiration. Despite her complaint, she didn't resist. Instead, she lazily draped her arms around his neck, accepting her fate with a resigned sigh. Uehara Shiroa tilted her chin up with two fingers, his gaze locking onto her captivating golden irises. "So tell me," he murmured, his voice low and provocative. "Are you planning to sleep with me, or are you trying to kill me?" His large hands roamed her smooth, flawless skin, tracing every curve with ease. Her body was as soft as the finest silk, warm and enticing beneath his touch. Yoruchi scoffed, refusing to acknowledge the shiver that ran down her spine. "Humph. My sneak attack almost worked this time," she insisted, her voice laced with defiance. Though her body betrayed her, heat pooling beneath her skin, her stubborn nature refused to admit defeat. Uehara Shiroa smirked at her persistence. "A bold witch like you dares to assassinate me? Looks like you need to be taught a lesson." He tightened his grip, his tone playful but firm. As she pondered their playful skirmish, Yoruchi's thoughts shifted back to the real reason she had sought him out. She lifted her head, her expression turning serious. "You've been making some big moves lately," she noted, watching him carefully. "After keeping such a low profile for so long, you're finally taking action. Why now?" Ever since Shiroa had arrived in Karakura town and crossed paths with Kasuke Urahara, he had rarely revealed the full extent of his strength. He had spent most of his time either completing necessary missions or indulging in a carefree lifestyle, eating, drinking, and entertaining himself while ignoring everything else. As a result, his once legendary reputation had gradually faded into mere stories and whispers. The court army, the force that followed him, had also ceased its expansion, taking a defensive stance rather than engaging in outright conflict. It was as if they had been waiting for something. However, Yoruchi and Urahara knew the truth. The foundation of the court army was Uehara Shiroa himself. He was a man who could remain dormant for years, appearing to do nothing, only to unleash his power in a single moment that would shake the world. And now, after all this time, his army was moving again. That meant one thing: Uehara Shiroa had decided it was time to act. She was eager to know what had changed. That curiosity had led her to seek him out, though she had taken the opportunity to test her skills against him as well. Uehara Shiroa remained silent for a moment, seemingly unfazed by her observation. He leaned back, his posture relaxed, only acknowledging her words when she rolled her eyes and began massaging his shoulders, trying to coax a response out of him. Only then did he lazily reply, "I do plan to take action. That's why the court army has begun to stir again. However..." He paused, a slow smirk forming on his lips. "My actions have nothing to do with you." Yoruchi raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what are you planning to do?" "I'm going to start with the nobles," he answered simply. Unlike others who might see the court army as their life's work, Uehara Shiroa viewed it merely as a tool, a means to an end. He enjoyed the power and the benefits it provided, but he had no grand ambitions of turning it into an empire. It wasn't that he was irresponsible. He simply understood how the world worked. In a world as extraordinary as this, the strength of an organization was entirely dependent on its leader's personal power. If Genryosei Shigekuni Yamamoto didn't wield the overwhelming might of Ryujin Jaka, the Soul Society and the Gotei 13 would have collapsed long ago. If Aizen and Yawatch weren't biding their time, restrained by the fear of losing in direct combat, they would have made their moves long before now. In the end, the strength of a force was meaningless without an individual strong enough to support it. For that reason, Uehara Shiroha had never concerned himself with matters like governance or expansion. His only priority was becoming stronger. Yoruchi listened quietly, then nodded in understanding. I see. So those arrogant nobles are in trouble, huh? A dangerous glint flashed in her golden eyes. Kill them all. Paint the streets red. I want to see a river of blood. Her voice carried a chilling edge, a stark contrast to her usual playful demeanor. Though she was born into one of the 5 great noble houses, or rather, the 4 great noble houses, now that the Shiba clan had fallen, she had long since abandoned any loyalty to the aristocracy. After the holification incident, it was those very nobles who had condemned her closest friends, sentencing them to execution without a second thought. Even after she defected from the Soul Society, the nobles, led by the Tsuneyashiro clan, had attempted to seize control of the Shihoin clan, targeting her brother in her absence. Had it not been for Uehara Shiroha's intervention, her family's downfall would have been inevitable. Later, when Shiba Ishin chose to remain in the human world, the Tsuneyashiro clan had used his absence as an excuse to strip the Shiba clan of their noble status, reducing the 5 great houses to 4. This had enraged Shiba Kukaku, one of Yoruchi's closest friends. So when it came to those corrupt, self-serving nobles, Yoruchi despised them. Though she couldn't openly move against them herself, she had no qualms about sitting back and watching someone else tear them apart. And if there was anyone who could do it, it was Uehara Shiroha. As she leaned back in the hot spring, a grin spread across her face, anticipation flickering in her gaze. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroha simply sighed, watching her amusement with mild exasperation. This woman, she loved chaos too much. Women may be a mistake for the country, Uehara Shiroha mused, a smirk tugging at his lips, but I choose beauties anyway. His tone was light, dismissive even, as if he truly did not care about the affairs of the world. To him, such concerns were nothing more than fleeting troubles, trivial distractions that held no real weight in his life. At that moment, Shihoin Yoruchi seemed to recall something. A thoughtful frown crossed her features as she tilted her head, a hint of confusion flickering in her golden eyes. Those nobles are wolves, she said slowly, her voice carrying a trace of disbelief. Vicious, greedy wolves that devour everything in their path without even spitting out the bones. Especially the Tsuneyoshiro family. They didn't even spare the Shiba clan, one of the great noble houses. She paused, her gaze sharpening. But when it comes to the court army, they've been strangely quiet. Even though you've been acting low-key, they haven't tried to sink their fangs into you. In fact, they've actually backed off and voluntarily ceded their interests. That's not like them at all. Her brows furrowed. How did you pull that off? To be honest, the situation was nothing short of bizarre. From what she knew, the Tsuneyashiro family's video hall, a crucial facility that had been seized from the other noble families long ago, had somehow fallen into Uehara Shiroha's hands. That in itself was insane. The Tsuneyashiro family had spent decades solidifying their control over the video hall, refusing to relinquish it even under immense pressure from other noble houses. Yet now, they had handed it over willingly? When had the Tsuneyoshiro family become philanthropists? It made no sense. This went against everything she knew about noble politics. The more Yoruchi thought about it, the more she felt as if her usually sharp mind was struggling to comprehend the absurdity of it all. There's no grand secret behind it, Uehara Shiroha said nonchalantly, his tone devoid of any concern. The answer is simple: as long as you're more ruthless and arrogant than the nobles, they have no choice but to back down. Yoruchi blinked. That's it? That's it, he confirmed. These so-called nobles only ever bullied the weak, they preyed on those who hesitated, those who played by the rules. They thrived in a system where the strong restrained themselves out of fear of disrupting the so-called balance of soul society. But Uehara Shiroha? He didn't play by their rules. Soul Society, at its core, was a broken system, a rotting empire propped up by archaic traditions and an illusion of order. The Soul King was nothing more than a severed, mutilated god, bound in chains to maintain an existence that benefited the few while exploiting the many. The nobles, power-hungry parasites, sat atop their ivory towers, treating soul reapers like disposable pawns while ensuring their own comfortable survival. And the Shinigami themselves? They had grown so accustomed to this corrupt cycle that they accepted it without question. They didn't fight it, instead, they simply submitted, as if their fate had already been sealed. But Uehara Shiroha? He refused to accept such a fate. He wasn't a hero, nor did he claim to be one. He had no interest in reforming Soul Society. But if he wanted something, he took it. If someone stood in his way, he removed them. That was all there was to it. The Tsunayoshiro family had simply learned that lesson the hard way. Of course, not all nobles were equal in his eyes. For those he favored, he allowed them to remain. For those he disliked, their only fate was death. Simple. That was why, despite being ennobled herself, Yoruchi acted so obediently around him, why she transformed from a wild, untamable cat into a docile, purring kitten when she was in his presence. And that was why even Tsunayoshiro Tokunada, a man destined to be one of the greatest villains of the future, was currently working under him, whether he liked it or not. 3 days later, the Grand Palace of the Wandenrake. A technician hurried across the Grand Hall, clutching a stack of documents in his trembling hands. His breath was heavy, but he forced himself to maintain composure as he reached the imposing figure standing before him. With a deep bow, he respectfully presented the documents to Jugram Hashwalth, the stern Ritter Grandmaster and second-in-command of the Wandenrake. Hashwalth accepted the report without a word. He merely nodded, a silent command for the technician to leave. As the footsteps faded into the distance, he carefully unfolded the classified report. His piercing gaze scanned the contents until, suddenly, his pupils contracted in sharp surprise. Special Combat Power List. Uehara Shiroa. The words echoed in his mind like a thunderclap. Not long ago, Yawatch, the king of the Quincy, had awakened from his centuries-long slumber. Though his heartbeat had returned after 900 years, his powers had only just begun to reawaken. As such, he remained in a state of hibernation, regaining his strength in intervals while issuing battle plans from the shadows. Even so, his first act upon waking had been to compile a list of 6 individuals. 6 beings marked as special war potentials. Individuals whose power, mystery, and unpredictability made them uncontrollable variables. They were threats that Yawatch could not afford to ignore. And Uehara Shiroa's name was on that list. The other names were already infamous. Ichibe Hayasube, leader of the Zero Division, wielder of true name manipulation. Genryosai Shigakuni Yamamoto, the strongest Soul Reaper in history, master of Ryujin Jaka. Sosuke Aizen, the king of deception, ruler of Hueco Mundo. Kisuke Urahara, the unparalleled genius, father of modern Soul Reaper technology. And now, Uehara Shiroa. What set Uehara Shiroa apart was his mystery. The Wandenrake had scoured every source they had. They had interrogated informants. They had searched for traces of his movements. Yet, nothing. They couldn't even pinpoint his location. All they could do was make vague speculations, tracking rumors and whispers that barely offered a glimpse into his true capabilities. That was precisely why he was so dangerous. Even to Yawatch, the man who saw all. Uehara Shiroa remained an enigma. And Jugram Hashwalth knew, deep in his soul, this man was not to be underestimated. When Yawatch awakened from his slumber, Jugram Hashwalth did not hesitate. He immediately stepped forward, bowing respectfully before delivering his report. Your Majesty, he stated solemnly, the special war potential, Uehara Shiroa, has left Soul Society and traveled to the human world. Yawatch, however, remained indifferent. He did not even glance at the report, merely resting his chin on his hand as a small, dismissive smile played at his lips. Hashwalth, he said, his tone calm yet absolute, that Uehara Shiroa will not be an obstacle to us. With the blood of the Soul King coursing through his veins, Yawatch was born beyond transcendence. Even though he had not yet fully regained his omniscience, his power alone placed him at the pinnacle of existence. Uehara Shiroha? A mere insect in the grand scheme of things. Even in his prime, he is nothing more than an anomaly, one that relies too heavily on the power of his Zanpakuto, Yawatch continued. He may have defeated Kenpachi Zaraki while the latter was sealed, but that alone does not make him a true threat. His potential is worth noting, yes, but nothing more. Hashwalth remained silent, his expression unreadable. Had he been truly dangerous, Yawatch mused, then my ability would have warned me of him. Yet, I have not seen him in the future. His voice was firm, unwavering. That alone proves he is insignificant. The mere fact that he is being acknowledged as a special war potential is already a courtesy. Hashwalth, however, did not share his master's certainty. He hesitated, fingers twitching slightly against the parchment in his hands. Your Majesty, he ventured carefully, I do not mean to question your foresight, but... He paused, his eyes darkening as an unpleasant memory surfaced in his mind. That man, he is strange. A cold chill ran down his spine as he recalled the bone-deep sensation of dread that had gripped him that day. At times, it feels as if he is deliberately avoiding the shadow of your power, Hashwalth murmured. As if he is moving beyond your gaze. Yawatch's crimson eyes flickered with mild interest before his expression hardened once more. He is but a temporary enigma, Yawatch declared. And even if he is avoiding my sight, it does not matter. Once his Bankai is stolen, he will be no different from any other powerless Soul Reaper. A calculated pause followed. Until then, merely monitor his movements, Yawatch ordered. There is no need for unnecessary action. The king of the Quincy leaned back in his throne, expression unreadable. Patience, he said simply. We need only wait for the perfect moment to strike in one fell swoop. Despite Yawatch's confidence, a lingering doubt settled in Hashwalth's mind. He had served His Majesty loyally for centuries, and he trusted in his power. But even so, that unease refused to leave him. Present day, the human world. At a secret base, hidden from both Soul Society and the Wandenrake, Uehara Shiroha stood calmly as he gazed upon a familiar face. Before him stood Mishabane, a woman he had not seen in years. The last time he had met her, she had been a graceful, naive girl, one who still carried the flaws of inexperience. Now, she had blossomed into a voluptuous and enchanting beauty, her once innocent demeanor replaced by a quiet confidence. Her alluring figure, with its perfect proportions, exuded both elegance and temptation. She was like a ripened fruit, rich with an irresistible sweetness. And yet, despite the undeniable maturity in her presence, her skin remained soft and delicate, as if untouched by time. A contradiction. A woman who was both tender and dangerous. Sir! Mishabane greeted, her voice smooth and intoxicating. Her large, expressive eyes shimmered with a depth of emotion and attachment that went beyond mere admiration. Years ago, her eyes had been empty. Lifeless, devoid of warmth or purpose. But after meeting Uehara Shiroha, that light had been rekindled. Now, she lived for him. A soft chuckle escaped Uehara Shiroha's lips as he pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her curvaceous waist. This woman, truly irresistible. Her body was soft yet firm, a perfect balance between delicacy and strength. She was gorgeous, but never vulgar, the kind of beauty that inspired obsession. As she melted into his embrace, he smirked. Perfection. And yet, even in this moment of indulgence, Uehara Shiroha did not forget his purpose. Breaking the silence, he spoke in a low, commanding voice. You will continue to lurk within Jinjo Kugo's Kyushin, he instructed. But do not get too close to the Foolbringers. Mishabane blinked, tilting her head slightly. As you command, sir, she responded smoothly. Jinjo Kugo, once a part-time Soul Reaper, now a wanted criminal, had been framed by the Tsuneyushiro family and cast aside by Soul Society. In retaliation, he had gathered fellow Foolbringers and formed the underground group known as Kyushin. On the surface, the Foolbringers were not particularly strong, but their abilities were highly unique, dangerous, even. Among them, the most troublesome was Tsukishima's Book of the End, an ability so broken that it could rewrite history itself. Even Ichigo, a prodigy among Soul Reapers, had struggled against it. But Uehara Shiroa was not concerned. Once Tsukishima and his allies fell, Mishibane would take control of the organization, bending them to his will. Another pawn for his ever-growing empire. Another step toward his true goal. His purpose had never been about world peace. The court army existed solely for his own pleasure. "Yes, sir," Mishibane whispered, a soft blush dusting her cheeks. "I will satisfy you in every way possible." Her devotion to him was absolute. To her, Uehara Shiroa was the only light in the world, her reason for existence. Once, she had been nothing. A hollow shell, drifting through life without meaning. But now, she was whole. Like a vine wrapping around a towering tree, she clung to him, her only desire being to serve, to please, to remain by his side forever. And she would gladly give him everything. As she surrendered herself to him, Uehara Shiroa's thoughts drifted elsewhere. With his observation haki, he reached out, searching for a certain someone. Kurosaki Ichigo. He knew trouble would always find the protagonist. And where trouble appeared, so too would watchful eyes. But he had no interest in interfering with their game. For now, he would simply observe. After all, time was on his side. And in due time, he would have everything he desired. Chapter 87, The Grown-Up Mishibane, and Rukia's Unique Artistic Talent. Under the current circumstances, Uehara Shiroa's best course of action was simply to enjoy life, to sit back, relax, and wait for the moment of inevitability when he would stand at the pinnacle of all existence. Of course, along the way, if there was an opportunity to profit from the chaos, he wouldn't mind playing the fisherman, reaping the benefits while others struggled. And when he was bored, he sought out entertainment, witnessing the birth of legendary moments, watching fate unfold in real time. Meanwhile, in the human world, Kurosaki Ichigo lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts running wild. Everything that had happened today was unbelievable. For as long as he could remember, he had always been able to see ghosts, something that most people could not. It had never bothered him too much. If anything, he had grown used to it. But lately, those spirits had become clearer, more frequent, more persistent. Their presence was stronger than ever, and it was beginning to feel like they were surrounding him. And then today happened. That thing, a massive, grotesque creature, had appeared before him. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. It was monstrous, almost like a cockroach blown up to terrifying proportions, grotesque and horrifying. It had ferocious eyes, a terrifying white mask, and an aura so oppressive that he could feel his very soul trembling. Worse yet, ordinary people couldn't even see it. That meant that no one else could even hear its piercing, unnatural screech or feel the air shudder with its presence. For the first time, Kurosaki Ichigo felt true fear. But what was that monster? Why had it been chasing a little girl's ghost? And who was the girl who had appeared out of nowhere and slain the monster in a single stroke? His mind raced as he replayed the events over and over again. Just as he was deep in thought, the window to his room slid open, a cool night breeze filtering in. A black butterfly fluttered into the dimly lit room, its wings barely making a sound. And then, a girl leaped inside. She had short black hair, a petite frame, and wore a traditional black robe that looked like something out of a samurai drama. A sheathed sword rested at her waist. Ichigo's eyes widened. He recognized her instantly. The girl from earlier. The one who had saved him. The one who had cut down that monstrous being like it was nothing. But what the hell was she doing sneaking into his room in the middle of the night? As he tried to process the absurdity of the situation, the girl remained completely focused. She barely even acknowledged his existence, her sharp gaze scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. Then, her eyes narrowed as she muttered under her breath. "It's nearby. Very close." Ichigo sat up, blinking in disbelief. "What do you mean close to your head?" He snapped his leg up in a swift kick, aiming straight at her. The girl's reflexes were impeccable. In a blur of motion, she caught his leg with ease, blocking the attack like it was child's play. Her violet eyes widened in shock. You. She stared at him, genuine confusion flashing across her face. You can see me? She tightened her grip slightly, as if testing something, before adding. And your attack actually worked on me? Ichigo scowled. Of course, I can see you. What kind of stupid question is that? And why the hell are you sneaking into my room like some burglar? But the girl didn't respond immediately. Internally, she was stunned. Had it not been for her teacher's rigorous training, she might not have been able to react in time to that sudden attack. Something was definitely strange about this boy. Her spiritual awareness hadn't even picked up on him, yet he had been able to touch her, hit her, physically interact with her, which meant he had spiritual power. So why had her senses failed? Ichigo, meanwhile, was glaring at her. Oi! Are you even listening to me? The girl finally sighed, rubbing her temple as if dealing with a headache. I am Kochiki Rukia, she introduced herself at last. I am a Shinigami, a death god from Soul Society. Ichigo scoffed. I don't believe you. You're probably just a special kind of ghost. I've seen tons of ghosts in my life, but I've never seen a death god before. They don't exist. Rukia's eye twitched. This fool. Without hesitation, she bound him using a Kido spell, sealing him immobile in an instant. Ichigo struggled, his eyes widening as an invisible force locked his body in place. Oi! Oi! What the hell is this? Ignoring his protests, Rukia calmly performed a soul burial on a lingering ghost nearby. Then, she casually flipped open a small notebook. She began explaining. This is a hollow, she said, pointing at an illustration of a grotesque monster. Hollows exist between Soul Society and the real world, only emerging when they sense the presence of prey souls that they can devour. She turned the page, revealing another drawing. And these are Shinigami, whose job is to exterminate hollows and maintain the balance of souls. Ichigo, still restrained, stared at the horrifyingly abstract illustrations in disbelief. His eye twitched. What the hell is that? The drawings were so awful that he could barely tell what he was even looking at. They looked like scribbles drawn by a 3-year-old. He gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to scream. Oi! Did your PE teacher teach you how to draw? At the court army base. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroa watched the scene unfold through his perception. He shook his head in mild disappointment. At first, he had been pleased. In the original timeline, Rukia had been kicked down by Ichigo the moment she appeared, landing flat on the ground in a rather embarrassing pose. This time? She had dodged the attack effortlessly. That meant his training hadn't been in vain. However, when he saw Rukia's masterpiece of an explanation guide, Uehara Shiroa felt a wave of despair wash over him. As someone recognized as an artistic genius in Soul Society, he wanted to disown her on the spot. This was a disgrace. Mishabane, sitting beside him, giggled at his expression. She picked up a neatly sliced piece of fruit, gently feeding it to him as he continued watching. Is it that bad? She asked teasingly. Uehara Shiroa exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing against his temple. Let's just say that Rukia's painting skills have transcended the appreciation of this era. Mishabane chuckled, satisfied with his reaction. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroa leaned back, his golden eyes gleaming with anticipation. The real show was just beginning. The next part was going to be even more exciting. Just as Rukia finished explaining the basics of hollows and Shinigami, a deep, guttural roar shook the night air. The sound was bone-chilling, primal, like a beast on the hunt. Kurosaki Ichigo froze, his body stiffening as a sense of dread crept up his spine. That feeling, the same one from earlier in the day, had returned. A terrifying pressure surrounded him, making his heart race. A bad premonition settled in his chest. Didn't you say there was another hollow nearby? Ichigo demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. It's here. Go and kill it. Rukia's brow furrowed slightly. I did come here following its Ryatsu, she admitted. But then, confusion flickered in her eyes. Yet, for some reason, I couldn't sense it until now. It's as if some powerful force was blocking my perception. She narrowed her eyes, her mind racing. This feels familiar. She had experienced something like this before, but this time, something about it felt different. What the hell are you talking about? Ichigo snapped. The damn thing is right there. Can't you hear that loud roar? As the monstrous sound echoed again, the ground trembled, and the distant crash of breaking buildings rang through the air. Ichigo's heart pounded. His family was here. His father, Kurosaki Isshin. His younger sisters, Kurosaki Yuzu and Kurosaki Karen. Were they safe? His body tensed as panic surged through him. Rukia's eyes suddenly widened. She rushed to the door, her body moving on instinct. The moment she stepped outside, a gust of wind slammed against her face. And then, she felt it. A crushing, monstrous Ryatsu. It was right here. Far too close. At this distance, she should have sensed it long ago, so why hadn't she? She cast a quick glance at Ichigo. Something about this boy was off. He had some kind of power, a force that interfered with her own spiritual perception. At the same time, Kurosaki Yuzu, barely 11 years old, staggered toward Ichigo's room. Her small frame trembled as she pushed herself forward. Unlike ordinary people, she had some spiritual awareness. She could see ghosts, though not clearly. To her, they were like faint outlines, silhouettes in the dark. But this thing, this monster, was something else entirely. She could barely make out its grotesque form, but she felt it. Its presence was like an oppressive shadow, suffocating her. And now, her sister Karen was in its grasp. Yuzu had tried to protect her, but she had been too weak. She gasped for breath, pushing herself up the stairs, ignoring the burning pain in her limbs. Oni-chan. She whimpered, voice breaking. With what little strength she had left, she stumbled into Ichigo's room. Brother! Ichigo turned just in time to see his little sister collapse onto the floor. Yuzu! Her delicate frame shook violently, and her lips quivered as she reached out toward him. Her voice was weak, almost desperate. Karen, she sucked in a trembling breath. She tried to protect me, but that thing. Tears welled in her frightened eyes. Please, Oni-chan, save her. And with that, she lost consciousness. Ichigo froze. A sharp, twisting pain coiled in his chest. He clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. But at that moment, he was still bound by Rukia's Kido. His rage, his fear, his desperation, none of it mattered. He couldn't move. Ichigo fought against the invisible bindings, his muscles straining. And then, he saw her. Karen. His little sister. She was dangling helplessly in the air, held tightly in the clawed grip of a massive hollow. The monster towered over them, its hulking figure grotesque and twisted. A long white mask covered its deformed face, and its breath came out in slow, rasping hisses. Its soulless eyes locked onto Ichigo. And in that moment, Ichigo snapped. A roar of pure fury erupted from his throat. With an explosive burst of strength, he did the impossible. He broke free. The Kido spell shattered, its binding force obliterated under his sheer willpower. Rukia's eyes widened. Impossible. Kido was designed to bind souls, it wasn't something that could be overcome with mere physical strength. Yet Ichigo had done it. She didn't have time to process what had just happened. There was no time for questions. She lunged at the hollow, unleashing a strike of spiritual energy, her blade glowing with power. But the hollow was smart. It used Karen as a shield. Rukia hesitated, just for a second. And in that second, the hollow counterattacked, sending a devastating shockwave through the air. Rukia gasped, her body flung back as pain tore through her. Ichigo's eyes widened in horror. Rukia staggered, blood dripping from her side. She couldn't fight anymore. Which meant there was only one option left. She lifted her Zanpakuto, her grip tightening despite her injury. The only way now is for you to take my power. Ichigo's breath hitched. If you let me pierce your soul with this blade, Rukia continued, you may gain the power of a Shinigami. But there's no guarantee. If you fail, you will die. She fixed him with a serious gaze. It's your choice. But to Ichigo, there was no choice to make. Give me the damn sword, Shinigami. Rukia's lips curled slightly. It's Rukia Kuchiki. Ichigo took a deep breath. And my name is Kurosaki Ichigo. He grabbed the sword. And stabbed himself. The world exploded into light. The moment the blade pierced his chest, an unimaginable power surged through him. A blinding Ryatsu erupted, engulfing everything in a brilliant white light. The hollow lunged forward, sensing an easy feast. But as the light faded, the hollow's right arm was gone. Ichigo stood tall, clad in a Shinigami uniform, a massive Zanpakuto gripped in his hand. The hollow shuddered. Ichigo's golden eyes gleamed with raw power. And then, with one clean strike, the hollow was cut down. Rukia, still kneeling, could only stare in shock. I only meant to give him half my power, she murmured, dazed. But he took all of it. Her fingers trembled. Kurosaki Ichigo, who the hell are you? At the court army base, Uehara Shiroa sat comfortably, watching the legendary scene unfold before him. The moment had finally arrived. This was the birth of Kurosaki Ichigo, the man who, in the future, would wield his crescent moon Getsuga to cut down the entire Bleach world in a single strike. Uehara Shiroa raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of amusement and intrigue. So, it's finally happening. Ichigo had taken his first step toward greatness. But there was one problem. Ichigo Kurosaki was an idiot. That reckless fool had caused Rukia to lose her Shinigami powers. Not that it was Rukia's fault, no, Uehara Shiroa knew better than to blame her. From the moment Rukia Kuchiki had set foot in the human world, Ichigo had been attacked by a hollow. And not just any hollow. It was his second encounter with a hollow in 16 years. That wasn't coincidence. Not even close. Uehara Shiroa's observation haki had already detected the three most dangerous masterminds watching from the shadows. Urahara Kisuke, Aizen Sosuke, Ichibe Hayasube. These three old foxes were lurking in the darkness, pulling strings. Rukia's fate had already been decided the moment she arrived. No matter how cautious she had been, she never had a choice. She was meant to lose her power. Her encounter with Ichigo Kurosaki was not an accident. It was predetermined. Set into motion by forces beyond her control. From the beginning to the end, Rukia was nothing more than a pawn in a grander scheme. Helpless. Disposable. Controlled. Uehara Shiroa's golden eyes darkened. He was not pleased. No one toyed with his apprentice without consequences. Even if it was Aizen, even if it was Ichibe, even if it was Urahara Kisuke. They would pay. Eventually. He had already noted their names in his little black book. Far away, hidden beneath the veil of night. Urahara Kisuke observed the events with a complicated expression, his hat casting a shadow over his unreadable gaze. He whispered to himself. I didn't expect you to awaken your power like this. His fingers tightened slightly around his cane. I hope I won't need your strength next time. The plan had worked. If everything continued as expected, he could successfully conceal the Hogyoku. And then everything would be fine. But Urahara wasn't a fool. He knew Aizen was too cunning to let things proceed so smoothly. And more than that, Uehara Shiroa's arrival in Karakura town had changed everything. There were too many variables now. If things went wrong, he might have no choice but to rely on Kurosaki Ichigo in the future. He didn't want to, but he needed a backup plan. Meanwhile, Aizen Sasuke sat in front of a monitor, watching the chaotic battlefield unfold with a calm, almost amused expression. The corners of his lips curled into a small, knowing smile. The original choice was correct after all, he murmured to himself. Ichigo Kurosaki was awakening exactly as planned. This was his doing. The hollow attack. The timing of Rukia's arrival. Everything had been orchestrated to push Ichigo toward his latent potential. But then, something unexpected had occurred. Something that went beyond his original calculations. A variable had entered the board. And that variable was Uehara Shiroa. Aizen's fingers tapped lightly against the armrest of his chair. Did he come to Karakura town because he noticed my plan? His eyes gleamed with intrigue. Or is it for something else? His voice lowered, almost whisper-like. The power of the Soul King. Could it be that there is more than one? For over 20 years, Aizen had been secretly investigating Uehara Shiroa. He had tested him. He had studied him. And he had come to one conclusion. Uehara Shiroa had abilities no Shinigami should possess. Abilities that surpassed even Bankai. Abilities that felt too similar to something else. The power of the Soul King. Aizen's sharp gaze flickered with excitement. This was interesting. At that moment, a quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. Lord Aizen, a soft, silky tone drawled. Ikemara Jin stood beside him, his fox-like smile in place. That boy Ichigo Kurosaki, Jin murmured. He ain't that special, is he? He gestured at the monitor, where Ichigo stood victorious, his new Zanpakuto gleaming in the moonlight. His power ain't all that impressive, Jin said lazily. So why go through all this effort just to make him stronger? Aizen chuckled. Oh, Jin, he murmured. If that were the case. His voice took on a deeper, more menacing tone. Then Uehara Shiroa wouldn't have come here at this moment. Aizen's expression sharpened. Did he sense my plan? Or does he have his own reason for being here? His fingers steepled together as he considered the possibilities. Either way, he mused, it seems the power of the Soul King may not be as singular as we once believed. A thrill ran through him at the thought. At his side, Tozen Kaname stirred. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. So, Lord Aizen, does this mean our plan can begin? Aizen's smile widened. Not yet, he murmured. But soon. His gaze darkened, his mind already racing ahead. Everything was still going according to plan. Except now. The game had become even more interesting. Chapter 88, The Part-Time Reaper, Kurosaki Ichigo, appears. He had waited for this day for far too long, sacrificing more than anyone could imagine. The price he had paid was steep, his body, his soul, and the trust of those around him. Yet, he harbored no regrets. Because he believed, no, he knew that justice would prevail. Aizen stood calmly, his expression as unreadable as ever, as he spoke with quiet confidence. We have effectively locked down the locations of Urahara Kisuke and Hirako Shinji. They have nowhere left to run. No matter how many tricks Urahara Kisuke has up his sleeve, his backup plans will not alter the inevitable. His gaze sharpened as a faint smile curved his lips. No matter what choice he makes, it will not change the outcome of our victory. Meanwhile, in the Soul King's palace, the captain of the Zero Division, Hayasubi Chibe, observed Kurosaki Ichigo, who stood before him gripping his Zanpakuto. A deep chuckle rumbled in his throat as he narrowed his eyes. Kurosaki Ichigo is truly an exceptional boy. His words carried a mixture of admiration and caution. Ichigo's very existence was both a blessing and a potential disaster. He had seen countless warriors rise and fall, but this boy was different. I must be careful, Ichibe murmured to himself, his smile fading slightly. I can't allow him to fall into the hands of the Quincy. If he does, the delicate balance of the three realms will be shattered beyond repair. A shadow passed over his face as he extended his hand, preparing a contingency measure, one that would ensure that, if the worst came to pass, he would have a way to stop Ichigo before it was too late. Elsewhere, deep within the invisible empire, the supreme ruler of the Quincy, Yhwach, sat upon his throne, his crimson eyes gleaming with an unfathomable depth. He spoke in a low, commanding voice, his expression a mixture of amusement and inevitability. You deceived him, you manipulated him, you tried to claim him as your pawn. His fingers drummed against the armrest of his throne, his gaze distant as if looking through the very fabric of fate itself. But in the end, he returns to me. Just as I will inevitably claim this world as my own. His voice grew heavier, thick with the weight of prophecy and certainty. Hayasube Chibe. Yamamoto Shigokuni. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he leaned forward, his aura suffocating. I have returned from hell. Late at night. Within the quiet confines of Kurosaki Ichigo's room, a figure moved silently. Uehara Shiro had arrived. The darkness clung to him like a second skin as he stepped closer to Ichigo, who was deep in sleep. Tonight was a crucial moment. Ichigo had recently undergone his first transformation into a Soul Reaper, and the strain had exhausted him. His spiritual pressure was fluctuating, chaotic yet full of raw potential. He had no idea how many forces were watching him, how many had already placed their marks upon him. Uehara Shiro's hollowed eyes gleamed as he silently activated the Mind Stone's power, coupled with his observation haki. His observation haki had reached an unprecedented level, allowing him to listen to the very fabric of the world. With this power, he could trace the origins of all things, see the past, the present, and the invisible threads connecting them. His perception was so refined that it surpassed even Gold Roger's legendary ability to hear the voices of all things. And right now, Uehara Shiro could see everything that had been placed upon Ichigo. A tangled web of power and influence. Some belonged to Ichigo himself, but many others were foreign, placed upon him by those who sought to claim him as their own. Aizen. Urahara Kisuk. Yhwach. Hayasube Chibe. Each of them had carved their mark into Ichigo's very soul, staking their claim over his fate. Good grief! Uehara Shiro sighed internally as he analyzed the absurd number of influences on Ichigo. Ichigo wasn't just a warrior, he was a battleground. A Soul Reaper's power, a Hollow's essence, a Quincy's bloodline, and even a fragment of the Soul King's will were all competing for dominance within him. And then there were the outside forces, each with their own motives. Aizen, you are a fascinating Soul Reaper. I look forward to watching your growth. Urahara, such a useful tool shouldn't go to waste. Hayasube Chibe, you must not become a Quincy, or the balance of the realms will collapse. Yhwach, my son, born in darkness, join me. Zangetsu, you cannot be a Soul Reaper, because if you do, I will kill you. White, why think so much? Just cut down whatever stands in your way. 6 powerful individuals. 6 conflicting agendas. 1 Ichigo Kurosaki. It was almost laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Ichigo was being pulled in 6 different directions at once. If he tried to obey them all, he'd be ripped apart, metaphorically and literally. No wonder this kid is so messed up. Uehara Shiro shook his head. But ultimately, this had nothing to do with him. He was here for one reason alone, to fulfill his objective. With an impassive gaze, he reached deeper into Ichigo's spiritual space, extending the Mind Stone's influence. The instant his power touched Ichigo's soul, an invisible disturbance rippled through the very fabric of existence. Hayasube Chibe and Yhwach felt it instantly. Both had placed their own marks on Ichigo, and now those marks were reacting, being triggered by an unknown force. Aizen and Urahara noticed subtle fluctuations in their surveillance, though they dismissed them as minor disruptions, nothing worth investigating. But Hayasube Chibe and Yhwach knew better. The moment they tried to exert control, they were met with something incomprehensible. Something they could not see through. Yhwach narrowed his eyes, his fingers twitching slightly as he focused. I never expected Hayasube Chibe to possess such an ability. His voice was calm, but his thoughts ran deeper. No, this isn't Ichibe's doing. He clenched his fist. This power is beyond even my vision. But once I regain my full strength, nothing will be beyond my grasp. Yet deep inside, even he felt a flicker of unease. Meanwhile, in the Soul King's palace, Ichiba's jovial demeanor darkened for the first time in centuries. Impossible. Yhwach's power should still be sealed. He tried to push against the unseen force, to see what was happening within Ichigo's consciousness. But he failed. His interference was completely and utterly blocked. For the first time in his long life, Hayasuba Chibe was powerless to act. And that realization terrified him. In the depths of a pure white space adorned with towering skyscrapers, a disturbance began to manifest. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker in the otherwise stable atmosphere. Then, without warning, ripples spread across the entire realm, distorting the very fabric of this spiritual domain. The once unshakable structures trembled as if disturbed by an unseen force. This was Ichigo Kurosaki's inner world, a realm that had always reflected his inner turmoil and growth. But now, it was becoming unstable. Then, within the cascading ripples, a figure stepped forth. A middle-aged man, sporting an unshaven beard, black hair, and a pair of sunglasses, emerged from the shifting space. His presence was both familiar and unsettling. He bore an uncanny resemblance to Yhwach from 1,000 years ago, the very embodiment of the ancient Quincy king in his prime. This man was none other than the manifestation of Ichigo Kurosaki's Quincy powers, known as Zangetsu of the future. But he was not alone. From the swirling distortions, another figure appeared behind him, one clad in pure white, his presence exuding an eerie, almost predatory aura. A grin stretched across his pale face, his golden irises gleaming with mischief and chaos. This was White Ichigo, the embodiment of Ichigo's hollow power. Or, to be more precise, he was the fusion of White Hollow and Ichigo Kurosaki's Soul Reaper abilities. Together, these two beings, Zangetsu and White, were the dominant forces within Ichigo's soul, the two halves of his true power. As the ripples continued to spread, White sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "TCH. What's this now?" He tilted his head, cracking his neck before grinning wider. "Someone trying to mess with this idiot's power again? What a joke!" He scoffed, arms crossed, his razor-sharp teeth glinting under the flickering light. "Ichigo's destiny ain't something you can control. Without power, the brat wouldn't even survive, let alone protect his family. Even he knows that. So why the hell are these bastards always trying to hold him back?" Zangetsu, however, did not share White's scornful amusement. His brows furrowed as he scanned the space, his expression filled with uncertainty. "I didn't do this." His voice was calm but carried a hint of wariness. This wasn't Ichigo's doing. The boy had only recently awakened his full power, there was no way his consciousness was capable of causing such a disturbance on its own. Moreover, Zangetsu couldn't sense the source of the ripples at all. And that was troubling. As a being intrinsically connected to Ichigo's soul, Zangetsu was one with this space. More than that, as a Quincy, his ability to perceive spiritual energy was second to none. Nothing should have been able to hide from his perception in this world. Yet, I can't trace the origin of this power. Zangetsu admitted, his voice heavy with an unfamiliar emotion, uncertainty. White's grin widened at that. "Oh? So we've got an intruder?" His body trembled with excitement as a suffocating killing intent erupted from him. His entire being radiated murderous delight. "Ha! Now this is interesting." He cracked his knuckles, his entire frame buzzing with anticipation. "I was getting bored out of my damn mind. Finally, something to break the monotony. Hope this guy ain't weak, it'd be a shame if he died too fast." Zangetsu, however, remained composed. His mind raced through possibilities before settling on the two most likely culprits. Could it be him? Or Hayasuba Chibe? Unlike White, Zangetsu had experienced the grand machinations of powerful figures firsthand. He understood how valuable Ichigo was in the eyes of both the Soul Society and the Quincy King. He didn't need to guess how many people wanted to control Ichigo. Right now, he and White, despite their differences, shared a common understanding: whoever dared to enter this space uninvited was an enemy. Their instincts sharpened as they braced themselves. Then, the ripples stilled. A figure began to take shape. The presence descended upon them like an overwhelming tide. A shadow loomed over the two beings as a figure stepped forward. His gaze bore down on them, filled with a calmness that was neither hostile nor friendly, but carried an undeniable authority. A presence that demanded obedience. White's manic grin widened at the sight of the newcomer. His fingers twitched in anticipation as he let out a wild laugh. Oi, oi! Welcome to my world. He spread his arms dramatically, his golden eyes gleaming with excitement. Can't wait to see what you're made of. The figure, however, merely snapped his fingers. The moment he did, the entire spiritual world shifted. A pulse of unimaginable power surged outward, filling the vast space. And then, the towering skyscrapers began to crumble. Yet, they did not fall. Instead, the disintegrating structures morphed, the shattered debris coalescing into an ethereal swarm of black butterflies. The black butterflies danced in the air, their fluttering wings carrying a mesmerizing, otherworldly glow. Then, as if responding to an unseen command, they gathered together, their forms shifting once more. From the swarm of darkness, radiant white cranes emerged, their wings stretching wide as they soared through the sky. Their graceful figures radiated purity, their melodic cries echoing like a celestial chorus. And then, a white jade pathway extended before them, gleaming under an unseen light. At the end of that path, a young man walked forward. His white trench coat billowed behind him, each step he took filled with unshakable purpose. His presence was not overwhelming, nor did he exude an oppressive aura. Yet, the sheer weight of his existence dominated the space. Even White, who had never feared anything, found himself momentarily unsettled. TCH. What the hell is this? His instincts screamed that this man was dangerous. This was not normal. Zangetsu, too, narrowed his eyes as he analyzed the scene. His Quincy perception scanned the area, trying to decipher the method behind this phenomenon. Illusions? He muttered. It had to be. No one, not even the original Yawatch, had ever demonstrated the ability to rewrite an entire spiritual domain with a mere thought. If this was an illusion, however, it was unlike any he had ever encountered. White, still skeptical, clenched his fists. You're saying this guy isn't real? That all this is just some trick? But even as he said it, a gnawing feeling in his gut told him otherwise. Something about this was too real. As they braced themselves, the mysterious figure finally spoke. His voice was smooth, unwavering, and carried a quiet confidence that left no room for defiance. Hello. His lips curled slightly as he gazed at them. My name is Uehara Shiroa. He spread his arms, welcoming them into his domain. Welcome to my world. Suspended in midair, the two figures faced the intruder with wary eyes. They were exactly as Uehara Shiroa remembered. The future Uncle Zangetsu stood tall in his black windbreaker, his face solemn and unreadable behind dark sunglasses. He radiated an air of quiet authority, embodying the wisdom and patience befitting the manifestation of Ichigo's Quincy powers. Beside him floated White Ichigo, a stark contrast in his white Shinigami uniform. He held a pure white Zanpakuto, his aura crackling with an unstable, inhuman energy. Unlike the composed Quincy manifestation, White's grin stretched wide, filled with unrestrained madness and the insatiable hunger for battle. Their presence confirmed one undeniable truth: Ichigo Kurosaki's true power had fully awakened. However, the wielder of this power, the real Ichigo, was still far from being able to wield it properly. His will wavered, his understanding was lacking, and his control was fragile at best. Despite possessing immense potential, Ichigo had yet to reach the level where he could seamlessly integrate these powers, let alone ascend to the pseudo-spiritual king level. At this moment, Ichigo Kurosaki had power beyond comprehension, but he lacked the ability to use it effectively. White sneered as he took a step forward, the space around him distorting under the weight of his spiritual pressure. His golden irises glowed with dangerous amusement. "You said this is your world?" His voice dripped with mockery. "Ha! That's the funniest thing I've heard all day." Then, without warning, "Die!" White exploded with raw, unrestrained spiritual pressure, his white Zanpakuto slicing through the air as he lunged at Uehara Shiroa with terrifying speed. The sheer force of his spiritual pressure sent shockwaves rippling through the space. It was chaotic, violent, and brimming with hollow influence, like a storm of destruction. Unlike ordinary hollows, his power was refined, elevated, closer to Vastolord or even beyond. But at the same time, he wielded a Zanpakuto, the mark of a soul reaper. He was an abomination of two worlds. A being of pure transcendence. Yet, despite the overwhelming ferocity of his attack, Uehara Shiroa merely sighed. "It's just a shallow form of Zangetsu." His voice carried a note of disappointment. He had already seen through White's limitations. At this stage, White was equivalent to Ichigo's incomplete Soul Reaper powers. His true potential could only be unlocked once Ichigo mastered Shirkai and Bankai. Until then, he was incomplete, a fraction of what he could become. If Ichigo had mastered his Zanpakuto, White would have already evolved into Tensa Zangetsu by now. Indeed, Tensa Zangetsu, Ichigo's Bankai form, was something far more intricate than a mere power boost. The chains wrapping around its hilt symbolized its true function. For Ichigo, the chains were mere decorations, a visual quirk. For White, however, they were a deadly weapon. In his hands, the chains extended like a whirlwind, creating an unpredictable, long-range assault technique that made his attacks almost impossible to defend against. "It's a shame," Uehara Shiroa mused. Ichigo's always been an idiot when it comes to learning technique. As White's blade descended, Uehara Shiroa made his move. His leg shifted slightly. Then, a massive foot materialized out of thin air, descending like a divine executioner. With the Mind Stone's power amplifying his consciousness, Uehara Shiroa's attacks carried unimaginable force. His raw strength, combined with his ability to manipulate the mind, allowed him to execute devastating killing techniques with ease. The moment the colossal foot connected, White was sent hurtling backward at impossible speed. The force of the impact was cataclysmic, the very space trembled, and White was launched like a ragdoll caught in a hurricane. He spiraled through the air, his body distorting from the sheer velocity of the blow. This wasn't just an attack. This was absolute domination. White, who could fight on par with elite Soul Reaper captains, had been swatted away like an insect. He barely managed to stabilize himself mid-air, his entire body surging with hollow energy as he forced himself to stop. His breathing was ragged, and for the first time in a long while, he looked shaken. His golden eyes darkened as he gritted his teeth. "TCH. That wasn't an illusion," he muttered, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. If it weren't for his hollow structure and high-speed regeneration, he wouldn't have survived that attack. "Damn it. This guy is a monster." He turned to glare at Zangetsu, his voice dripping with frustration. "Oi! You better come up with a plan fast. Or else I'm gonna be the one getting wrecked out here." Despite his usual arrogance, White had enough survival instinct to recognize a fight he couldn't win alone. But Zangetsu wasn't paying attention to him. Zangetsu had been analyzing Uehara Shiroa the entire time. Unlike White, he had not acted recklessly. Instead, he had used his Quincy perception to carefully observe everything. The energy fluctuations, the patterns of attack, the underlying structure of Uehara's power. He needed to understand before he acted. But the battle had ended too quickly. He barely had time to process before it was over. This force. His voice was barely a whisper. He had never seen anything like it. Even Yawatch himself, the king of Quincy, had never displayed such unfathomable power. The way Uehara Shiroa manipulated not just the battlefield, but reality itself, it was beyond comprehension. For the first time in centuries, Zangetsu was left speechless. Uehara Shiroa, meanwhile, remained unimpressed. With a slight tilt of his head, he regarded the two beings before him with mild amusement. Not bad. You two are stronger than most. He took a slow step forward, his presence alone causing the space around him to tremble. But strength alone isn't enough to defeat me. He smirked. You'll need more than brute force if you want to stand a chance. Zangetsu and White. Two of the most powerful aspects of Ichigo's soul found themselves facing an opponent unlike any they had ever encountered before. Chapter 89, White's defense is broken, and Zangetsu is shocked. He hadn't expected this Shinigami to be so powerful. With just a mere wave of his hand, he could unleash such terrifying attacks. The sheer dominance displayed left his opponents in utter disbelief. Just as Zangetsu hesitated, contemplating whether he should intervene, Uehara Shiroa struck first. A massive energy-formed fist erupted from his punch, soaring through the air at an incredible speed. Before Zangetsu could react, the powerful force struck him, sending him flying backward. Even though he instinctively activated Blood Venet to bolster his defense, it was futile. The impact was beyond comprehension. He had never encountered such raw, overwhelming power before. With just a single punch and a kick, Uehara Shiroa effortlessly crushed two combatants whose strength rivaled that of thousand-year-old captains. His might was so overwhelming that both Kyoka and Zangetsu were left in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. Inside the depths of Ichigo Kurosaki's spiritual space, Uehara Shiroa stood with his arms crossed, gazing at the two core manifestations of Ichigo's power. A faint smirk played on his lips as he shook his head. Ichigo Kurosaki was no ordinary man. He wasn't simply a hybrid of a Fullbringer, a Quincy, a Shinigami, and a Hollow. His power was in a league of its own, an entity of unparalleled strength. White himself was a vasto Lord-class Hollow, a being capable of absorbing Shinigami energy to grow infinitely stronger. Ichigo's Shinigami bloodline stemmed from Isshin Shiba, a former captain of the Gotei 13 and a member of one of Soul Society's 5 noble families. The Shiba lineage alone carried immense pride and formidable potential. His Quincy heritage was equally extraordinary. He was the son of Kurosaki Masaki, a pure-blooded Quincy of immense talent. Furthermore, his Quincy abilities were directly influenced by none other than Yhwach himself, making them exceptionally potent. Each of Ichigo's bloodlines, whether Quincy, Hollow, Fullbringer, or Shinigami, held power at the highest tier. However, despite his monstrous potential, he had yet to fully integrate his abilities, leaving his mental resilience full of gaps that made him vulnerable to attacks targeting his psyche. Of course, these vulnerabilities only applied to those who could wield mind-based abilities. In terms of raw strength, speed, and combat potential, Ichigo was still an anomaly. Even if an enemy had the means to attack his mind, few could withstand his overwhelming presence long enough to make a move. Yet, Ichigo had one fatal flaw: his reluctance to kill. He often held back, giving his opponents a chance to display their abilities, which had led to multiple defeats. The most infamous example? The legendary Carpet Ichigo incident. After effortlessly subduing both Hollow Ichigo and Zangetsu, Uehara Shiroa made no further moves to press his advantage. He didn't intend to merely defeat them, he wanted them to submit entirely, to acknowledge his supremacy. This wasn't just a battle. This was conquest. Zangetsu, now back on his feet, looked shaken. His brows furrowed in deep confusion as he struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. "What kind of power is this?" he muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. The attack Uehara Shiroa had just unleashed wasn't Kido. It wasn't derived from a Zanpakuto. It wasn't a Fullbring ability. And it certainly wasn't Quincy energy. It felt similar to the power of the Soul King, yet something about it was undeniably different. For the first time in ages, Zangetsu found himself unable to analyze his opponent's technique. He had no countermeasures. No strategies. Just pure uncertainty. Meanwhile, White had no patience for contemplation. His mind operated on instinct, on raw aggression. He didn't care what kind of strange power his opponent possessed. As long as he could cut him down, that was all that mattered. "I knew you were unreliable." White snapped at Zangetsu. Without hesitation, he charged forward at full speed. His philosophy was simple: if one strike wasn't enough, then he would strike again.
And again. And again.
As long as his blade could cut, as long as he could keep swinging, he would eventually win. The blade gleamed with deadly intent as it slashed through the air, carrying the full force of his hatred and determination.
650 degrees of razor-sharp destruction. White's attack was monstrous, an ordinary captain wouldn't have been able to dodge it. It was a strike designed to kill. Yet, Uehara Shiroa didn't move. He didn't dodge, didn't counter, didn't even lift a hand to defend himself. He simply stood there. And watched. His gaze was calm, almost indifferent, like a god looking down upon an insignificant mortal. His golden eyes held no fear, no urgency. There was only pity. White's blood boiled at that expression. "You bastard! You dare look down on me?"
With newfound fury, he unleashed even greater power. The blade in his hands shimmered as his spiritual energy surged to its peak.
The next strike would be unstoppable. Or so he thought. The moment his blade should have connected, something impossible happened.
The edge of his sword passed through Uehara Shiroa's body, cleanly, effortlessly. Yet, there was no impact.
No resistance.
Not even the fabric of Uehara Shiroa's clothing was disturbed. White's confident smirk froze in place. His body stiffened, his eyes widened in disbelief.
What? How could this be? His strike was perfect. How had he missed?
With no time to waste, he immediately swung again. This time, he adjusted his angle, made sure his precision was flawless. Yet, once again, the blade sliced through thin air, completely bypassing Uehara Shiroa's form as though he weren't even there. A cold chill ran down White's spine.
"What did you do to me?" he roared in frustration.
His face flushed red with fury and humiliation. Twice. He had missed twice. And both times, his enemy hadn't even moved. No, this wasn't a failure on his part.
This was something else.
This bastard had done something to him. He gritted his teeth, his hands trembling.
Damn it! Damn it!
Before he could make another move, Uehara Shiroa effortlessly delivered a devastating punch to his gut, sending him flying backward. White coughed violently as he crashed into the ground, his body racked with pain. Uehara Shiroa exhaled slowly, his expression unchanging. "I didn't do anything," he said casually.
"Don't try to hit me."
He took a step forward, peering down at White with an almost amused look. "Maybe you're just afraid of me," he continued. "So afraid that, deep down, your instincts are making you miss on purpose."
Could it be? No way. Zangetsu's expression changed drastically as realization dawned upon him.
He narrowed his eyes, analyzing the situation carefully. Without hesitation, he activated his Quincy abilities. A massive spirit bow and arrow materialized in his right hand, glowing with an ethereal light. The sheer intensity of the energy caused the very air around them to tremble.
This was the true manifestation of a Quincy spirit weapon.
With practiced precision, he drew the bowstring and released an arrow of pure razor, its radiant glow illuminating the entire space. A sacred aura filled the air, as if an epic hymn resonated around the massive arrow.
This was no ordinary attack. The Hyliage File, a Quincy's holy arrow of destruction, was an ability feared even among the strongest of Soul Reapers.
Yet, despite the immense power bearing down upon him, Uehara Shiroa remained completely unfazed. His body did not shift, his stance did not change. It was as if he had no intention of dodging at all. He did not view Zangetsu and White as true threats. "My sacred arrow of destruction is not so easy to block," Zangetsu declared, his voice firm. This arrow was not something an ordinary Soul Reaper could withstand. If it landed, even a seasoned captain would be forced to their knees. White, still struggling to recover from his earlier defeat, grinned as he watched the Quincy unleash his full power. A sinister and satisfied expression spread across his face. The Quincy's light arrows had the ability to annihilate the soul itself. Even as a high-level Vasto Lord, he knew better than to take such an attack head-on. And this guy, this so-called Soul Reaper, would be no exception.
No matter what strange ability Uehara Shiroa possessed, he could not possibly emerge unscathed from this. And yet, the arrow missed. It streaked past Uehara Shiroa's unmoving form, shooting straight into empty space. White's smirk faltered. His breath hitched. No! How can he still be this powerful? His shock was evident, his mind scrambling for an explanation. He was moments away from shouting, "There's a traitor among us," out of pure disbelief. Zangetsu was no less shaken. His expression darkened. "It's really happening," he muttered under his breath. "This arrow should have landed." There was no reason for it to miss. He had fired with absolute precision. His opponent had not dodged, had not deflected it. And yet, the attack had veered off course. There was only one possible explanation. Somewhere, deep within himself, he had subconsciously altered his own aim. Without realizing it, he had chosen to miss. That realization sent a shiver down Zangetsu's spine. What a terrifying ability. His eyes narrowed, recalling how their surroundings had shifted earlier. The spiritual space had changed, not just in appearance, but in essence. They were supposed to have the home advantage in this domain. And yet, everywhere they turned, Uehara Shiroa was in control. His earlier assumption had been wrong. Completely wrong. This wasn't an illusion. It was something far worse. It was an absolute, unshakable force and ability that transcended mere trickery or deception. An ability that could only belong to someone on the level of the Soul King himself. Could it really be an illusion? White's frustration boiled over. Damn it! It doesn't feel like one, but this is beyond infuriating. Despite his growing rage, he forced himself to hold back. He had learned his lesson from his previous failures. If he couldn't break the opponent's ability, then no matter how many times he attacked, he would never land a hit. He would exhaust himself in vain, unable to even graze his enemy. That alone made this battle unlike any he had ever faced. His instincts screamed at him. The opponent in front of him was no ordinary foe. His recklessness had cost him dearly before. If he wasn't careful, he would die here. Hey! He turned to Zangetsu with a scowl. You're supposed to be the brains here. Figure out what's going on and break his ability already. I need to cut this guy into pieces. Zangetsu ignored him, his focus locked entirely on Uehara Shiroa. His mind raced with possibilities, with theories, with half-formed conclusions that he struggled to piece together. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroa was calmly using observation haki, analyzing the remnants of Quincy energy lingering in the air. He had no interest in merely defeating them. No, this was an opportunity. An opportunity to study Quincy power firsthand. He knew that, in the future, he would inevitably have to face the Quincy's again. He would cross paths with Yawatch, the almighty king of the Quincy, and his elite Stern Ritter. Understanding their abilities now would prepare him for that confrontation. After all, Yawatch's forces were not to be underestimated. Jugram Hashwalth, Yawatch's second-in-command, was already on the same level as Yamamoto Genryusei Shigakuni himself. Gremi Thumos, with his the visionary power, had instantly killed the monk of the Zero Division. And then there was Spirit King, the monstrous form that had absorbed the remains of the Soul King. His strength was so overwhelming that he was considered to be infinitely close to the Soul King's level. The Quincy system was fascinating. Even an ordinary Quincy, once they awakened their script, the Holy Word, could ascend to captain-level power instantly, surpassing centuries of training that Shinigami had to endure. It was an undeniable truth: Quincy power was desirable. The more Uehara Shiroa analyzed it, the deeper his understanding grew. If he ever had to fight a Quincy again, he would be far more prepared than before. Over on the other side, Zangetsu had no idea that his abilities were being completely dissected. He extended a hand to stop White, who had been ready to charge forward recklessly. His voice was firm. "It's astonishing," he admitted. "I never expected you to have such complete control over this spiritual space, over us." White's scowl deepened. Control? Him? Ha! His tone was full of disdain. But somewhere, deep down, unease clawed at him. Because it was true. If this wasn't an illusion, then Uehara Shiroa truly held absolute control over the spiritual domain. And that meant, he controlled them as well. That was why all their attacks had failed. That was why they had looked like clowns in this battle. A sickening realization settled in White's gut. For the first time, he felt true despair. This ability is beyond shameless, he muttered, gritting his teeth. With something like this, he can just treat us like punching bags. Zangetsu exhaled sharply before shifting his approach. If brute force wouldn't work, then reasoning might. As far as I know, he started, today is the first day Ichigo has awakened his power. You have no real reason to be our enemy. In fact, Ichigo is currently aligned with the Shinigami. It was rare for Zangetsu to concede, but this opponent was unlike any other. White, though still seething, stood still. His fists clenched, his body trembled, but he did not attack. Uehara Shiroa raised an eyebrow. Don't misunderstand me, he said with a smirk. I saw your little family gathering, and I figured I'd drop by to say hello. His smile widened. I wasn't here to destroy your fun. But I did expect a decent fight. His gaze swept over them, both Zangetsu and White, battered and shaken. And this, he scoffed. This is all you've got? Uehara Shiroa had another reason for stepping into this battle. He wanted to analyze Kurosaki Ichigo's power. The boy was a unique existence, a fusion of Shinigami, Quincy, Hollow, and Fullbringer. His potential was immense, but it remained unrefined. At this stage, he was still immature, his abilities scattered and untamed. But that very potential was precisely why so many powerful figures coveted his strength. Aizen saw it. Yawatch claimed it. And if those two had a reason to desire Ichigo's power, then why shouldn't he? If even that old monk, Hayasubichibe, could acknowledge the boy's importance, then surely he could, too. Yet, for now, Ichigo was far from reaching his peak. His power was incomplete, fragmented, far from the level that would make him a true threat. Still, the mission Uehara Shiroa had set for himself here had been completed with remarkable ease. The process was far simpler than he had anticipated. Ha! A weak groan echoed through the spiritual space. White gritted his teeth, his expression twisted in frustration. Damn it! This time, it was Ichigo who held me back. That's the only reason I lost. His voice rose, but the underlying bitterness was evident. It's not because I was incapable. And it definitely wasn't because I was afraid of this guy. Zangetsu, exhaling in relief, ignored his companion's tantrum. Now that you've said hello, can you leave? He asked, his tone wary but restrained. Deep down, he desperately hoped that Uehara Shiroa had no real intention of harming them. The absence of killing intent from the mysterious intruder was a relief. If possible, Zangetsu would rather avoid outright hostility against such an opponent. This ability, this terrifying force that had rendered them helpless, was beyond comprehension. They stood no chance against him. Uehara Shiroa, however, merely smirked. Then, see you again if fate allows. His voice was distant, elusive, as if fading into the wind itself. I hope that next time we meet, you will be stronger. His form vanished in an instant. The ethereal white cranes that had hovered around him dissipated like mist. The jade-colored pathway beneath his feet faded as though it had never existed. With his departure, the spiritual space gradually began to revert to its original form. The once altered domain, filled with surreal landscapes and manipulated physics, shifted back into the familiar towering buildings of Ichigo's mindscape. Zangetsu stared into the distance, his brows furrowed. If possible. He murmured under his breath, I hope we never see him again. But he knew. That was wishful thinking. Ichigo would continue to grow. He would evolve, his power would reach unprecedented heights. And when that day came, they would inevitably cross paths with Uehara Shiroa again. There was no escaping that fate. Suddenly, a loud voice shattered the lingering silence. Bastard!
White, who had been stewing in his own frustration, finally snapped. His voice roared through the space.
Next time we meet, I'll make you pay. The sheer audacity of his declaration was laughable. Zangetsu merely gave him a sideways glance, unimpressed. Big words when the fight is over. Nonsense during the battle. Silence when it's too late. He sighed. White was many things: violent, reckless, hot-headed. But he wasn't an idiot. Deep down, he knew the truth.
He knew exactly who to challenge and who to never provoke. If we can't crack his ability, we have no chance of winning.
Zangetsu's voice turned grim. Unless Ichigo can perfectly control his power, there's nothing we can do.
His gaze darkened.
No more than that. They didn't even know how Uehara Shiroa's ability worked. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't just spiritual manipulation.
It was something far beyond that. Zangetsu could only theorize that it was a rule-based ability, one that specifically targeted mental consciousness and absolute control of the battlefield. There was no trace of an illusion. No signs of energy manipulation.
And yet, it was completely unavoidable. This wasn't just some powerful skill. It was a godlike ability. How could they possibly counter something like that?
White fell silent again, clenching his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms.
Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroa returned to his body.
The moment his consciousness settled back into reality, a system prompt echoed in his mind.
Ding!
Congratulations to the host for completing the special mission, 14th Three-Party Talks, Subdue the Protagonist.
Reward, EX rank ability, Unlimited Blade Works. An EX rank ability.
Uehara Shiroa's lips curled into a triumphant smirk.
Woohoo, I'm flying high. 20 years of effort? Gone in an instant.
This was beyond broken. A single phrase popped into his mind.
From now on, I will stand in the sky.
He had already crushed White and Zangetsu effortlessly with the Mind Gem's power. Now, he had something even greater. His heart pounded with excitement as he immediately checked the ability's description. Unlimited Blade Works.
Level, EX. Proficiency, Beginner. Type, Inherent Barrier. Ability. Copy any weapon seen or used into the world of Fate/Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works. Expand the mental world to trap enemies inside. Project the copied weapons into reality. As an EX-level ability, it can replicate most artifacts. The replicas retain the original abilities. Introduction.
This ability originates from the Fate series, where Amiya Shiro ascended to an immortal heroic spirit using Unlimited Blade Works. Obtained after completing Special Mission 14, Three-Party Talks, Conquer the Protagonist.
I am the bone of my sword. Strong. It was worthy of its EX ranking. The effect was ridiculous, borderline invincible. Although it was the same ability as Shiro Amiya's, Uehara Shiroa's version was stronger due to the higher ability level. With this power, he could dominate even Coyote Stark and Gilgamesh. The sacred relic of the Tsunoyoshiro family, and Reikioten, could only copy Shirkai-level Zanpakuto. But Unlimited Sword Works? It could replicate Bankai. Chapter 90, EX-level Unlimited Blade Works. From now on, I will stand in the sky. From this moment onward, Uehara Shiroa could wield the Reikioten in his left hand and Shinken Hakioken in his right. Control first, strike later. Instant death.
Even gods would shake their heads in despair upon witnessing such a sight. Even the almighty Soul King Yawach had tried it and found it formidable, admitting it could send him into an eternal slumber, a sleep he would never wake up from.
And if that wasn't enough? Then add Zanka no Tachi, Shigarami, Ikemanji. Moreover, Unlimited Blade Works wasn't limited to copying the Zanpakuto of the Shinigami.
It could also replicate the unique weapons used in the Fullbring technique, among countless others. He wasn't just a Shinigami, he was a walking armory, a true master of weapons, wielding an arsenal of divine blades, each carrying unparalleled abilities.
At this moment, even Gilgamesh's king's treasure paled in comparison, reduced to sobbing in a corner.
This was not just power.
This was invincibility. The past 20 years had not been in vain. A test of power. Having obtained such a powerful ability, Uehara Shiroa was eager to test it out.
If it weren't utterly inhumane, he would have loved nothing more than to bully White and Zangetsu once again, savoring the thrill of complete domination. But after seeing Ichigo Kurosaki, his body drenched in sweat, his face pale and trembling from exhaustion, he decided to let him go for now. After all, he wasn't a demon. Sure, his moral compass was a bit skewed, but he wouldn't go as far as to drain a high school student dry on their first encounter. Of course, the main reason he decided to stop was because, under the influence of the Mind Stone, defeating White and Zangetsu felt as effortless as swatting away a fly. A single punch each, and they'd crumple like ragdolls. Where was the challenge in that? This was not enough to fully demonstrate the overwhelming power of unlimited blade works. If there was no suitable opponent at the moment, then he would fight himself. Inside the training space, countless shadow clones of Uehara Shiroa surrounded him. Each one mimicked his stance, weapons drawn, their cold eyes locked onto him. A smirk played on his lips. Time to see what I can really do. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed a barrage of Zanpakuto abilities. Shatter, Kyoka Suijetsu. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Hyarenmaru. Shoot to kill, Shinso. Scatter, Senbun Zakura. Howl, Zabumaru. The flowery winds become disturbed, the god of flowers sings, the heavenly winds become disturbed, the devil of heaven sneers, Kaiten Kayakatsu. A whirlwind of Shirkai abilities erupted, flooding the battlefield. Flashes of steel. Explosions of spiritual energy. Clones were ripped apart in seconds, unable to withstand the sheer onslaught of power. This was just the entry-level ability of unlimited blade works, and it was already this powerful. Even though it could currently only replicate Shirkai, that alone was enough to overwhelm captain-level opponents. After all, in many cases, some Shirkai abilities were far deadlier than Bankai. And when combined, they became utterly unstoppable. The sheer variety of attacks, blades slashing, elements colliding, reality-distorting effects activating, made it impossible for enemies to react in time. Any opponent faced with this arsenal would experience something truly terrifying. Mental overload. The human brain could only process so much information at once. Facing dozens of different abilities at the same time, each requiring different countermeasures, was enough to cause an opponent to freeze up on the spot. And this was only the beginning. This was just the EX-level infinite blade system at its lowest proficiency. Even at this stage, he could annihilate captains who had fought for over 1,000 years. Once his proficiency increased even slightly, he would be capable of taking on transcendent beings. And at the perfect level? Even Pseudo-Soul King-level beings would tremble before him. Once he reached the absolute peak perfect level EX, even Soul King Yawatch himself would have to break into a sweat just by seeing him. This was true power. This was what it meant to be alone at the top. Unrivaled. Unmatched. Utterly invincible. After returning to the court army base, Shiroa celebrated his newfound power with Mishabane, enjoying the moment. A few days later, however, new schemes began to unfold. Aizen Sasuke and Urahara Kisuke launched a series of thrilling strategic battles revolving around the Hogyoku. Their minds played a silent war, each move calculated, each strategy layered upon another, a clash of intellects on a scale that shook the three realms. Only a handful of individuals could keep up with their deadly chess match. Uehara Shiroa was one of them. Compared to those two, he was just as exhausted, but for entirely different reasons. While Aizen and Urahara burned through their brain cells strategizing, Uehara Shiroa spent his time hosting grand banquets in the pleasure district. At this point, he had single-handedly raised the prestige of Flower Street's courtesans. His taste in beauty had grown so refined that ordinary women could no longer catch his eye. As a result, a group of beautiful women dedicated themselves to self-improvement, ensuring they remained worthy of his presence. They trained not only in beauty, but also in art, music, chess, poetry, and painting, refining their skills to an elite level just to earn a moment of his attention.
In Flower Street, a geisha unrecognized by Uehara Shiroha was a geisha who couldn't survive. Simply put, wherever he went except for himself, everyone else would perish. After several days of revelry, Uehara Shiroha finally set his focus back on battle. By now, he had reached the mastery level of unlimited blade works. At this point, every increase in proficiency meant his power would double. Sitting in his room, he extended his hands. In his right hand, he grasped hollow energy. In his left, a Shinigami's spiritual weapon gleamed with brilliance. A terrifying dual power balance. On the surface, it looked like he had completely transcended the boundaries of race. But deep inside, he was still a pure-blooded Shinigami. This was the true dominance of unlimited blade works. And now, with the Mind Stone enhancing his abilities, his power had reached a level where even the original wielders of these techniques might not be able to surpass him. This was the true essence of perfection. Although the power of White Hollow and the might of pure blood Quincy were formidable, they were still far behind the overwhelming force of unlimited blade works and the Mind Stone. Because of this, Uehara Shiroha could perfectly replicate Ichigo Kurosaki's power down to the finest details. This was the true manifestation of "Your ability is good, but now it's mine." On the other hand, Ichigo himself was still struggling to perfectly integrate his own power. The conflicting forces of Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy, and Fullbring constantly clashed within him, making it difficult for him to harmonize his strengths. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroha had already reached a level where he could grasp the essence of these abilities effortlessly. And as luck would have it, this time, he had managed to hit the jackpot, extracting tremendous power from Ichigo Kurosaki. It was unexpected, almost like finding a legendary treasure drop in a game. He could only sigh. It seemed that Aizen and Urahara had truly raised Ichigo well. However, unlike Aizen, Urahara, the monk, and Yawatch, who obsessed over Ichigo's growth, monitoring his every move like creepy stalkers, Uehara Shiroha had no interest in treating Ichigo like a long-term investment. Ichigo Kurosaki's power was merely an enhancement for him, something useful but not the ultimate goal. He could take what he needed, but he wasn't going to waste time coveting it endlessly. After all, his real strength didn't come from Ichigo. It came from the task system, the unlimited blade works, and various powerful artifacts he had collected along the way. And now, his main focus would be on further developing the EX-level infinite sword system. If just the skilled level was already this powerful, then what about the perfect level? And what about the ultimate mastery? If daily task attribute points weren't enough to enhance his proficiency, then he would simply use shadow clones to increase his mastery through sheer repetition. With his powerful abilities, Image Hall support, the knowledge of a traverser, and an unrestrained imagination, he could push unlimited blade works to its very limits. From now on, I will stand in the sky. Uehara Shiroha wasn't just saying this. He would prove it. At this moment, inside the luxurious office of the court army, Kayaraka Shunsui was sitting across from Uehara Shiroha, wearing an expression of utter grievance. His lips twitched as he stared at Shiroha with resentment. "I think old man Yamamoto has changed," Kayaraku muttered with a sigh. "In your words, I'm no longer his most beloved girl." He crossed his arms, his usually relaxed demeanor showing signs of deep frustration. "Why is it that every time something goes wrong, I'm the one getting scolded?" Over the past few days, he and Uehara Shiroha had been indulging in the pleasures of the red light district together. Drinking, partying, and basking in luxury, completely undefeated. The nights had been wild, the entertainment top tier, and the company of beautiful courtesans had been endless. But there was just one small problem. Their spending was astronomical. They spent money like water, no, like a damn waterfall. And while Shiroha Uehara had a habit of throwing money around extravagantly, the real issue was Kayaraka Shunsui was footing the bill. Technically speaking, all of it was charged to either the 1st Division or the 8th Division's funds. Every time old man Yamamoto saw the outrageous expenses, his face would turn as red as a volcanic eruption, and he would unleash his fury on Kayaraku. Every single time. Is this even fair? Kayaraku groaned, rubbing his temples. All I did was spend a little bit of money, yet I get all the blame. Uehara Shiroa gave him a thumbs up, his expression completely shameless. This is called, the more capable you are, the more work you have to do. He chuckled. Besides, who else but you could convince old man Yamamoto to approve such ridiculous spending? The entire Soul Society knew. Brother Kayaraku was generous. Brother Kayaraku was loyal. And more importantly, Brother Kayaraku had the face of a true scam artist. Of course, Shiroa conveniently left out the fact that Kayaraku was nothing more than his scapegoat. The reality was, the Gotei 13, the noble clans, and the Red Light District were all locked in a financial war. Other men spent hard-earned money in the Red Light District, trying desperately to win favor from courtesans with real gold. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroa spent other people's money. The Gotei 13 and the noble families paid for him. He simply moved his fingers, and courtesans, who normally held themselves in high regard, would rush to him with dazzling smiles. And after being showered in his attention, the Red Light District would give him massive kickbacks and advertising fees. At the end of the day, Uehara Shiroa had found a way to make money while enjoying himself. The more he spent, the richer he became. A perfectly infinite cycle. After all, Kayaraku finally sighed in surrender, I am a little older than you. It's only natural that I take on a bit more responsibility, right? However, after a pause, his expression turned serious. That being said, I have never seen old man Yamamoto pay this much attention to someone before. His gaze flickered towards Uehara Shiroa. His actions are different from the past, almost like he's seriously considering retirement. The room fell into silence. Kayaraku Shunsui observed Uehara Shiroa's reaction carefully. Right now, all he lacks is a suitable successor. A rejection without hesitation. Uehara Shiroa leaned back, clicking his tongue. Old man Yamamoto is just getting soft-hearted in his old age. He crossed his arms. Do you really think he can't lift his blade anymore? It was true. Yamamoto Genryusai had changed. He had become more righteous, more sentimental, no longer the ruthless warlord he had once been. At the same time, Yawatch had also changed, transforming into an even colder, more ruthless emperor of the Wandenrake. It was ironic, both of them had become what they once despised. However, even if Yamamoto had softened, no one dared to stand against Ryujin Jaka. For now, he was still the pillar of Soul Society. It was not yet time for his retirement. Kayaraku Shuansue's words were clear. He wanted Uehara Shiroa to inherit the title of Captain Commander of Gotei 13. But Uehara Shiroa's response was immediate. Not a chance. Kayaraku sighed, shaking his head. It's a shame, he admitted. No one else is more suited for the role than you. But Uehara Shiroa didn't care. Captain Commander of the Gotei 13? Not even a damn dog would want that job. With a smirk, he shrugged. That may be true. But I refuse. As he spoke, Uehara Shiroa raised his small wine glass and took a leisurely sip. His eyes flickered with amusement as he glanced at Kayaraku Shunsui. Actually, you probably have another reason for coming here today, don't you? Kayaraku Shuansue's behavior was too unusual. The old man Yamamoto was still sharp as ever in battle, so there was no reason for Shunsui to be this anxious. If someone didn't know better, they might even think he was plotting a coup. It seemed the captain of the 8th Division had picked up on something significant. As expected of an old silver fox, his instincts were razor-sharp. Kayaraku sighed heavily, setting down his own drink. Brother Shiroha, you know. I've always had this nagging suspicion that someone is secretly plotting against the Gotei 13. Someone pulling the strings from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Uehara Shiroa's expression remained calm, but his mind sharpened. Kayaraku continued, his tone growing serious. The holification incident, it was just one part of a much bigger plan. And I know for a fact that Yurihara Kisuke wasn't the true mastermind behind it. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Think about it.
20 years ago, the former captain of the 10th Division, Shiba Ishin, mysteriously vanished. His disappearance only confirmed my suspicions that something larger was at play.
Kayarako exhaled, his brows furrowed in frustration.
And that's why I feel that old man Yamamoto has changed. If it had been the Yamamoto of the past, even a small suspicion would have led him to strike preemptively, crushing all threats before they could take root.
But now?
For the sake of so-called balance, the old man had chosen to remain silent, turning a blind eye to things he would have mercilessly eradicated in the past.
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing,
but it had sown the seeds of disaster.
Uehara Shiroha narrowed his eyes slightly. So, you already have a suspect in mind, don't you?
He could hear the unspoken meaning behind Kayarako's words.
In fact, he already knew exactly who Shunsui was referring to.
However, there was one undeniable truth in all of this. Kayaraku was absolutely right about one thing. If this had been the old Yamamoto, whether the suspect was truly guilty or not, the answer would have been simple.
Ola.
Kill first, ask questions later. But now, even though Yamamoto had clearly sensed something was wrong, he still prioritized stability and diplomacy. Uehara Shiroha had long suspected that the old man tolerated him precisely because he was willing to do the things Yamamoto couldn't afford to do, such as ruthlessly dealing with corrupt nobles when necessary.
Kayaraku nodded solemnly. I do have a suspect.
His voice dropped to a whisper, barely above a breath. According to my investigation, the Tsunoyoshiro family has been conducting taboo experiments in secret.
Experiments that involve holification. Uehara Shiroha raised an eyebrow.
Oh?
Kayaraku's expression darkened.
Not only that, but they've also perfected the technology of holification manipulation. He took a deep breath before speaking the name. And the only person in the Tsunoyoshiro family with the ability to holify multiple captain-level Shinigami is
Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada.
Over the years, Kayaraku Shunsui had frequently clashed with the Tsunoyoshiro family not because of politics but because he couldn't stand the atrocities they committed behind closed doors.
And Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada
was the worst of them all. He was a pure-blooded lunatic. A disease upon Seoul society itself. A man so arrogant and twisted that he treated life itself as nothing more than an amusing game.
Uehara Shiroha stroked his chin in thought. That's a reasonable assumption, he admitted.
But if I recall correctly, wasn't Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada imprisoned?
He shouldn't be a threat anymore, right?
Technically speaking, Tokunada was currently working under the court army, exhausted from relentless overwork. He was practically the employee of the month, a man buried under paperwork who barely had time to eat or sleep. But his usefulness had reached its limit. It was about time to get rid of him. In a way, this was his final service to Seoul society. A glorious contribution before his inevitable demise. A perfect ending, worth celebrating.
Kayaraku Shunsui frowned, concern flickering in his eyes.
That guy has been able to move freely for quite some time now, he muttered. But officially, he still can't appear in public.
He let out a sigh.
And soon, he'll be released from prison completely. Once that happens, he'll regain full freedom. His eyes sharpened. I'm worried that once that bastard is fully unleashed, his conspiracies will escalate to an even more dangerous level.
He gave Uehara Shiroha a meaningful look.
And you, my friend, have always refused the Tsunoyoshiro family's attempts to recruit you. His fingers tapped against the table.
That means, they don't see you in a favorable light.
His expression darkened. And now that they control the Central 46, they can and will use justice as a weapon to eliminate you. He sighed again, rubbing his temples. These corrupt rules, they're nothing but a poison eating away at Seoul society.
Uehara Shiroha smirked, his expression unbothered. Relax. He let out a low chuckle.
Rules? Rules are nothing more than words written on paper. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming with amusement.
And people? His grin widened. If people die, then the rules become meaningless.
He nearly burst out laughing, his expression one of pure glee.
What, Central 46?
They had long since become Central 46 corpses. When Kochiki Rukia's spiritual pressure completely disappeared in the human world, Aizen had used the opportunity to wipe out every last member of the Central 46 just for the fun of it. In Aizen's mind, it was almost like popping open a bottle of champagne.
It was hilarious.
Kayaraka Shunsui visibly paled.
You? He hesitated, then sighed. You better not be planning something crazy.
His voice wavered slightly. That monk, even though he seems easygoing, he does not care about our lives. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.